I noticed him before the party even started, standing outside the venue, leaning against the wall like he owned the place, smoking something thin and expensive looking. He didn't smile when Mallory and I walked past. He just looked at me with this sharp, dismissive glance, like he already knew I didn't belong there. I don't know why it got under my skin so much, but it did. I could feel his eyes burning into the back of my neck as I followed my wife inside. The night was loud, music thumping, people shouting over each other, champagne glasses clinking. Mallory disappeared almost instantly into a crowd of people who all seemed to adore her. I was left standing by the buffet table, holding a plate I didn't even want. And then, like some kind of bad movie cliché, the guy from outside walked in, calm and smug, as if the whole party was being thrown just for him. He didn't look at anyone else. His eyes went straight to Mallory. Not just a glance. He watched her like a hunter watches prey. She noticed him too. I saw it in her body language, the way her shoulders stiffened just slightly before she smiled. And then they locked eyes. I swear the room changed in that moment. The music didn't matter. The laughter didn't matter. It was just those two, staring at each other like they had a story I wasn't part of. I felt this tight, sour feeling in my stomach, jealousy mixed with dread. I wanted to go over there, to put my arm around her and make it clear she was my wife, but something stopped me. He walked right past me like I didn't exist. No nod, no acknowledgement. He went straight to Mallory, leaned in, and said something that made her laugh. Not just any laugh, but that soft, unguarded laugh I hadn't heard from her in months. I froze. I don't know why. I'm not the confrontational type, but something about him made me feel smaller, like I was just a placeholder in the room. And then he looked at me, just for a split second, with this smirk that said, "You can't compete with me." The rest of the night was a blur of subtle humiliations. Every time I tried to join the conversation, he'd cut me off with some clever comment. At one point, he joked about how Mallory always had a weakness for quiet guys, and everyone laughed. I laughed too, like an idiot, even though I wanted to disappear. But here's the thing. What he didn't know, what nobody in that room knew, was that I wasn't going to let this go. I'm not strong, I'm not clever, but I have one thing he doesn't. I don't stop. That night, I decided I'd find out who he really was, and why my wife looked at him like that. I couldn't sleep that night. Mallory fell asleep almost instantly, like nothing had happened, but I just lay there staring at the ceiling, my mind running in circles. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that smug grin on his face and the way she laughed at his words, like he had this power over her that I didn't. I kept asking myself, who was that guy? There was something in the way he looked at her, like there was history there, something I didn't know about. The next morning, Mallory acted like the party was nothing special. She poured herself coffee, humming a tune under her breath, but I couldn't play along. Who was that guy? The one who kept talking to you? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked up, her expression carefully neutral, and said, "Oh, that's just Grayson. He works in another department. He's harmless." Harmless. That word stuck in my head all day. I didn't buy it, not for a second. There was nothing harmless about the way he stared at her, the way he looked at me like I was just a footnote in her life story. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I felt like I was losing control of my own life. I went through her phone when she was in the shower. I told myself I was just going to glance, just to make sure I wasn't imagining things. But the second I saw his name in her messages, my hands started to shake. Most of the messages were work-related, at least on the surface. But there was something in the tone, something too familiar. A few emojis. A few inside jokes I didn't understand. And then one message from him that made my stomach twist. "Can't wait to see you at the party tonight. It's been too long." I didn't confront her, not yet. Instead, I spent the next day digging. I looked him up online, found his profile, his work history, even some old photos. He was the type of guy who seemed to have it all. Money, looks, that easy confidence I've never had. And the more I saw, the worse I felt. But then I stumbled across something I didn't expect. An old photo, buried deep in the company's social media page, from a retreat 2 years ago. There she was, Mallory, standing next to Grayson, their arms around each other like they were closer than just coworkers. The way she was smiling. I hadn't seen her smile at me like that in years. That was the moment I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. Something was going on. Maybe it was in the past, maybe it was still happening, I didn't know. But I had to find out. And if I had to make a fool of myself to get to the truth, so be it. The next step? I needed to see them together when she didn't know I was watching. 2 days after the party, Mallory told me she had a late meeting. She said it so casually, so naturally, that I might have believed her if I hadn't already seen that message from Grayson on her phone. I nodded, pretending to be supportive, but inside, my thoughts were a storm. Something about the way she smiled while mentioning a late meeting didn't sit right with me. It wasn't her usual tired, work-weary smile. It was different, like she was hiding something behind it. I waited for her to leave, my heart pounding harder than I'd like to admit. I don't know why I did it, why I grabbed my jacket, my keys, and followed her like some desperate private investigator. Maybe I was afraid of what I'd find, but I knew if I didn't, I'd keep torturing myself with the unknown. I stayed a few cars back as she drove downtown. She wasn't heading to her office. I knew her company's building well enough to recognize that we were nowhere near it. My grip tightened on the steering wheel as I watched her turn into the parking lot of a sleek, upscale lounge. Not a restaurant, not a coffee shop, a lounge. The kind of place you go when you want to hide in plain sight. I parked across the street, my pulse drumming in my ears. I watched her step out of the car, her emerald coat catching the glow of the streetlights. And then he appeared, Grayson, like he had been waiting for her. The way he walked toward her, the way she hesitated for just a moment before smiling at him, it made my stomach churn. I don't think they saw me. I stayed low in my car, watching as they went inside together. I wanted to tell myself this was just some work thing, but I couldn't ignore the way his hand briefly touched her lower back when they walked through the door. It was subtle, too subtle for anyone else to notice. But I noticed. I sat there for over an hour, debating with myself, my mind clawing for explanations. I considered calling her, asking what she was doing, but what would that prove? She'd just lie. Or maybe she'd tell the truth, and the truth would hurt worse than anything I was imagining. So I waited, and every minute felt like I was drowning in quicksand. Finally, they came out. I froze, holding my breath like that would make me invisible. They were laughing. Not just polite laughter, but real laughter, the kind you share with someone you're comfortable with. Grayson leaned close to say something, and she tilted her head, her hair brushing his shoulder. I felt something inside me snap. But then something strange happened. Instead of leaving, they stopped near his car. He handed her something, a small, white envelope. She looked nervous, glancing around like she didn't want anyone to see. And then, as if this wasn't enough to crush me, she hugged him. It wasn't long. It wasn't romantic. But it was familiar. Too familiar. I wanted to confront them right there, to march across the street and demand answers. But I couldn't. My legs wouldn't move. I just sat there, gripping the wheel, watching my wife drive away like nothing happened. That night, I didn't sleep. I didn't even pretend to. I just sat at the kitchen table, staring at the wall, trying to make sense of it. What was in that envelope? Why was she meeting him outside of work? And why did she look happier with him than she had looked with me in months? I knew I needed to find out. Even if it meant tearing my life apart, I needed the truth. The next day was torture. Mallory acted like nothing was wrong. She was cheerful, even overly nice, kissing me on the cheek before work and telling me she'd be home late again because of a project deadline. I just nodded, biting back the words I wanted to scream. Every moment I spent in that house felt heavier than the last. I kept seeing the image of her and Grayson outside that lounge, the envelope passing between them like some secret I wasn't supposed to know. I had to get my hands on it. I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe she'd hide it somewhere obvious. Maybe it wouldn't even be in the house. But something told me Mallory wasn't as careful as she thought she was. When she left for work, I searched the bedroom. I didn't start with the obvious places. I've seen enough movies to know people don't hide things where you'd expect them. After almost an hour of tearing through drawers, bookshelves, and even checking under the bed like some kind of desperate fool, I found it. It was tucked in her jewelry box. A plain white envelope with no name on it, sealed but not taped shut. My hands were trembling as I opened it. Inside were three things: a folded piece of paper, a small photo, and what looked like a keycard to some building I'd never seen before. The photo made my stomach drop. It was Mallory and Grayson, taken at some event I didn't recognize. They weren't doing anything overtly wrong, but the way they looked at each other in that snapshot was enough to set every nerve in my body on fire. It wasn't how colleagues looked at each other. It wasn't even how friends looked at each other. Then I unfolded the paper. It wasn't a letter, but it might as well have been a confession. It was an itinerary, a series of dates, times and locations, hotels, dinners, and even one meeting planned for the very next night. At a place I'd never heard her mention before. It wasn't her office. It wasn't even near her company. It was some luxury apartment building downtown. I wanted to confront her, to storm into her work and throw this paper on her desk, demanding answers. But some part of me, maybe the smarter part, stopped me. I realized that if I wanted the truth, I needed to see it with my own eyes. If she was lying to me, I needed to catch her in that lie. That night, I couldn't bring myself to look at her. I couldn't even pretend. She noticed, of course. "Is everything okay?" she asked as she curled up on the couch, scrolling through her phone. I just mumbled something about being tired and went to bed early. But I didn't sleep. I lay awake, my mind spinning, waiting for the next day to come. I had a plan now, as reckless as it was. I was going to follow her again, but this time, I wouldn't just watch from the sidelines. I would walk into whatever place she was meeting Grayson, and I would find out exactly what was happening between them. What I didn't know then was that the truth I was about to uncover would hurt far worse than my worst suspicions. I woke up the next day feeling like I was carrying a boulder on my chest. Mallory was already dressed, sipping coffee at the kitchen counter, her face glowing from the screen of her phone. She didn't notice me watching her. Or maybe she didn't care. For a moment, I just stood there, looking at her like she was a stranger. The woman I married, the woman I trusted, was meeting someone behind my back, holding envelopes with keys and itineraries I wasn't supposed to see. I wanted to scream, to ask her outright what she was hiding, but I knew I couldn't. Not yet. I had to let her think I was clueless, that I was still that quiet, trusting husband she could keep in the dark. She kissed me goodbye before heading to work, her perfume lingering in the air like a cruel reminder of everything I was about to do. The second she left, I checked my phone for the address on that itinerary. It was a luxury apartment building downtown, the kind of place that had private security, valet parking, and a lobby that probably looked like a five-star hotel. I couldn't shake the thought that this was where she was planning to meet him, Grayson. By evening, my heart was pounding with a mix of dread and determination. I followed her again, this time keeping even more distance. She drove calmly, humming to herself like she was just going to another late meeting. But when she pulled into the underground parking garage of that building, my chest tightened. There was no office here, no company headquarters, just expensive apartments where people with money and secrets lived. I parked a block away and slipped inside through the main lobby, acting like I belonged there. I don't know how I got past security. Maybe I looked confident enough. Or maybe I looked like I was supposed to be there, just another tired husband visiting someone. I kept my head down and took the elevator, my hands shaking as I pressed the floor number I'd seen scribbled on that itinerary. The elevator ride felt endless. Every second, I imagined what I was about to see. Mallory in his arms, Mallory laughing with him like she used to laugh with me, Mallory being someone I didn't recognize anymore. By the time the elevator doors opened, my stomach was in knots. I found the door. Apartment 14B. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure someone inside could hear it. I put my ear against the door, holding my breath. At first, there was nothing, just silence. And then I heard voices. Her voice. Mallory's. Soft, almost hesitant, like she was nervous. And then his voice. Grayson's. Smooth, confident, cutting through the air like he owned the moment. I wanted to burst in, but I froze. I couldn't move. My mind kept screaming, "Don't do it. You might not want to see what's behind that door." So instead, I listened. What I heard next made my blood run cold. He said something about keeping this quiet and not letting him find out. I knew they were talking about me. My palms were slick with sweat, and I felt like the hallway was spinning. I leaned against the wall, trying to breathe. I had to know more. I had to see for myself. I backed away, looking around, and noticed a window at the end of the hallway. The layout of the building gave me an idea. I could get outside, find the balcony that matched 14B, and see through the glass. It was crazy, but I didn't care. What I saw when I finally reached that balcony would haunt me forever. It wasn't what I expected. It wasn't just flirting or holding hands. It was something darker, something I couldn't fully understand in that moment. Grayson wasn't just close to Mallory. He was showing her something, a folder full of documents, and she looked scared. Not romantic, not happy, scared. That was when I realized this wasn't just an affair. It was something bigger, and I was standing in the middle of it without even knowing what game they were playing. I crouched outside that balcony like some pathetic shadow of a man, my breath fogging against the cold glass as I tried to get a clearer view of what was happening inside apartment 14B. Mallory's back was to me, her posture tense, like she was holding her breath while Grayson flipped through that thick folder of documents. Every few seconds, she'd glance toward the door, as if terrified someone might walk in. My mind was racing, every nerve screaming that I was seconds away from uncovering something I couldn't undo. I shifted closer, my fingers gripping the metal railing to steady myself, and that's when I heard them. Their voices were muffled through the glass, but certain words cut through like knives. "If he finds out, it's over. You know that," Grayson said, his tone almost taunting. "I'm not going to tell him. But this is getting too dangerous," Mallory whispered, and I swear I felt the ground drop out from under me. This is getting too dangerous? What did that even mean? My heart wasn't just pounding, it was rattling inside my chest like it wanted out. "You owe me, Mallory," Grayson said, leaning closer to her. "Don't forget who cleaned up your mess 2 years ago. Without me, you'd—" I didn't hear the rest because Mallory suddenly raised her voice, and the sound jolted me like an electric shock. "Stop bringing that up. I said I'd take care of it." I stumbled back from the balcony, my head spinning. What mess? What was she talking about? And why did he sound like he owned her? I suddenly felt less like a husband investigating a potential affair and more like someone who had stepped into a story I didn't understand, a story where my wife was keeping secrets that went deeper than I ever imagined. I could feel this panic rising in my throat, a desperate urge to know everything right now. My fingers trembled as I reached for the balcony door handle, ready to just throw it open and demand answers. But then I froze again. Something about the way she looked, shoulders shaking, eyes glistening even from where I stood, made me hesitate. Was she crying? I pressed my ear against the glass again. Grayson's voice softened, but it was still sharp. "You're not strong enough to handle this alone, Mallory. He'll find out eventually, and when he does, it won't be pretty. Maybe it's better if I tell him." "No," she interrupted, her voice trembling. "Please, don't. I'll tell him when I'm ready. Just let me handle my husband." My stomach dropped. The way she said my husband, like I was some problem she had to manage, made me want to smash through the glass. But then I realized, if I went in there now, I'd never get the truth. She'd lie, they both would, and I'd be left with nothing but my paranoia. So I did the hardest thing I've ever done. I backed away. I left the building without a word, my mind on fire with questions I didn't want to ask, but couldn't ignore. That night, when Mallory came home, I pretended to be asleep. She slipped into bed beside me, smelling like the expensive cologne that wasn't mine. I kept my eyes closed, my fists clenched, and my heart breaking as she let out a quiet sigh, as if nothing in the world was wrong. But something was very wrong. I now knew this wasn't just about Grayson, or a party, or even me being a jealous husband. Mallory was hiding something far darker, something she was terrified I'd discover. And I was going to discover it, even if it destroyed me. I woke up the next morning feeling like I hadn't slept at all. My body was exhausted, but my mind was alive with a sick kind of energy, every thought tangled up in that conversation I'd overheard. "You owe me, Mallory." Those words kept looping in my head, each repetition sharper than the last. What could she possibly owe that man? What had happened 2 years ago that I didn't know about? I had always believed that Mallory was an open book with me. Maybe not every page, but at least the big chapters. Now I was starting to think there was an entire life she'd hidden from me, buried deep enough that I wasn't meant to find it. But I was finding it, piece by piece, and each piece made me wonder if I even knew the woman lying next to me in bed. That day, I couldn't function like a normal human being. I tried going to work, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking every time my phone buzzed. I kept checking her social media, scrolling through old photos like I could read the truth in her smile. Every time I saw Grayson's name in a tag company post, I felt this hot surge of anger in my chest. I knew I had to do something, anything, or I'd lose my mind. So when Mallory told me she'd be working late again that night, I didn't hesitate. I told her I had plans too, smiled like I believed her, and waited until she left before following her once more. The city streets looked different that night. Colder, meaner. Maybe it was just me projecting all my paranoia onto the world, but everything felt sharper, like the universe was holding its breath, waiting for me to make my next mistake. I stayed several cars back this time, careful not to get too close. She didn't drive to that luxury building right away. First, She stopped at a quiet coffee shop on the edge of downtown. Through the window, I saw her sitting alone at a table, scrolling through her phone like nothing was wrong. Then Grayson walked in. He didn't sit across from her. He sat next to her, close enough that their arms brushed. They didn't kiss, but they didn't need to. There was an intimacy in the way he leaned close, speaking quietly, like every word between them was meant to be secret. Mallory looked tense, almost frightened, but she didn't pull away. I wanted to storm in and make a scene, but I forced myself to stay hidden, watching like a coward. After a few minutes, they both stood up and left together. I followed them on foot, keeping far enough back to blend into the crowd. My heart was hammering in my chest as they walked toward that same luxury building I'd been to before. I watched as they slipped inside, Mallory glancing over her shoulder just once, her eyes scanning the street like she was expecting to see me. For a second, I thought she had. I knew I couldn't just stand outside this time. I needed more than shadows and guesses. I needed something real. I waited 10 minutes, my breath coming in quick bursts. Then I followed them inside, keeping my head down like I'd done before. I took the same elevator, my stomach twisting in knots, and when I reached the 14th floor, I heard them immediately. Their voices were low but sharp, cutting through the silence of the hallway. This time, I didn't go to the balcony. I crouched by the door, my ear almost pressed to the wood, straining to catch every word. "You don't understand what's at stake here," Grayson said, his tone colder than I'd ever heard. "I do," Mallory shot back. Her voice was tight, like she was holding back tears. "But I can't tell him, not yet. It'll ruin everything." "You think keeping him in the dark is better?" Grayson laughed, but it wasn't a kind laugh. It was bitter. "He's going to find out eventually, Mallory. And when he does, it's going to break him." My stomach clenched so hard I almost doubled over. Break me? What could possibly break me worse than hearing this? What the hell were they hiding? I heard footsteps then, moving closer to the door, and panic shot through me. I ducked into the stairwell at the end of the hall, my pulse racing as I waited. A moment later, the door to 14B opened. I peered through the crack and saw Grayson stepping out, his face twisted in frustration. He didn't notice me, but I noticed something in his hand, a small, black flash drive. He shoved it into his pocket and left, the elevator doors closing behind him. I waited until he was gone before stepping out. I stood there, my hand hovering over the doorknob to 14B, my heart screaming at me to either open it or walk away. I didn't do either. Instead, I pressed my ear to the door again and heard Mallory's quiet sobs from inside. That sound cut deeper than anything else. I wanted to burst in and hold her, to demand answers, to tell her I wasn't strong enough to keep living in the dark. But I knew I wasn't ready. Not yet. I needed that flash drive. Whatever was on it, it had to be the key to all of this. I couldn't sleep that night. Every sound in the house felt louder, every shadow longer, as if the walls themselves were holding secrets I wasn't meant to hear. I kept thinking about that flash drive in Grayson's pocket, wondering what kind of bombshell it carried. My imagination spun through every worst-case scenario. Affairs, betrayal, blackmail, but I knew I couldn't live with guesses anymore. I needed facts. The next morning, Mallory left early, saying she had to meet with the team. I pretended to be half asleep, murmuring something supportive, but the second she closed the door, I was up and moving. I didn't know exactly how I'd do it, but I was going to get that flash drive. I started by following Grayson's car. It wasn't hard. He drove like someone who believed the world would always move out of his way. I tracked him to his office building, a sleek glass structure that seemed to scream power and ego. I waited outside for almost an hour, nerves eating at me like acid. Then, when I saw him go into a coffee shop down the street, I knew it was my only chance. I slipped into the building, my heart pounding, every nerve screaming that I was about to get caught. Somehow luck was on my side. I found his office on the 3rd floor, the door unlocked, his jacket draped casually over his chair. And in the pocket? The flash drive. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it, but I shoved it into my pocket and left before anyone could stop me. When I got home, I plugged it into my laptop, bracing for the worst. What I found wasn't what I expected at all. The drive was full of documents, contracts, old photos, emails, all related to Mallory's company. And then I saw the truth. 2 years ago, Mallory had been framed for a major mistake at work, something that could have cost her job and reputation. Grayson had helped her by covering it up, but not out of kindness. He had been holding it over her ever since, using it as leverage. That's what I heard on the balcony. It wasn't an affair. It was manipulation. He'd been blackmailing her. The relief I felt was overwhelming, but so was the guilt. I had spent weeks doubting her, spying on her, treating her like a stranger. And through it all, she had been trying to protect me from this mess, from Grayson's threats. I knew I couldn't keep this to myself. That night, when Mallory came home, I sat her down and told her everything. About following her, about what I'd heard, about the flash drive. I expected her to be furious, but instead, she cried. She told me everything. How Grayson had been cornering her for months, how she'd been afraid to tell me because she didn't want me to get dragged into her nightmare. We made a decision together that night. We took the drive, the emails, everything, and went straight to her company's HR department. It wasn't easy. Grayson tried to twist the story to make it look like Mallory was complicit, but the evidence was overwhelming. By the end of the week, he was out. Fired. For the first time in months, we could breathe again. Mallory and I spent a whole weekend just talking. Really talking. About everything we'd both been hiding. All the ways we'd grown apart without noticing. We made a promise to never let secrets or silence come between us again. The strangest thing is, I think this whole nightmare made us stronger. I saw sides of Mallory I'd never seen before. Her courage, her resilience. And she saw that I was willing to fight for her, even when I was scared out of my mind. Last night, as we sat on the porch, watching the sun set with our fingers laced together, she leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "We're going to be okay." And for the first time in a long time, I believed it.